The fog rolled in from the Pacific, a familiar spectral presence that blanketed the coastal town of Mornington, Oregon, in its customary morning shroud. Frank Sanders stood at the window of his daughter's bedroom, a room that had become a shrine, a time capsule sealed against the ravages of 22 years. He watched as the mist swirled around the distant lighthouse, blurring the line between sea and sky, much like the years had blurred the line between hope and despair. He turned away from the window, his gaze sweeping over the untouched landscape of a teenage girl's life, circa 1990. Faded posters of bands long since disbanded clung to the walls. Her desk remained a tableau of interrupted ambition, textbooks and notebooks neatly organized, a future that had simply ceased to be. "It's time," he whispered, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. He was echoing the conversation from the night before, a painful negotiation with his wife, Elaine. They had finally, formally agreed. After more than 2 decades of living in a state of suspended animation, they needed to accept that Alicia was never coming back. Today was the day they would sort through her belongings, a final, heartbreaking act of letting go. Frank opened the window, and a gust of fresh, salty air disturbed years of settled dust. He sneezed, the mundane sound jarring in the sacred silence. He moved to the closet and began the methodical process of dismantling the past. Each item was a ghost. Her favorite blue sweater, the pale pink dress she wore to her junior prom, the faded jeans with the crooked, colorful patches she had sewn on herself. He sorted them into boxes: donation, storage, keepsakes. When he reached her school supplies, he hesitated. These were not just things, they were symbols of her aspirations. She had been accepted to the University of Oregon, her future mapped out with a passion for marine biology. As Frank sorted through textbooks and binders, his fingers brushed against a heavy, unfamiliar volume. It was Alicia's high school yearbook. He realized with a jolt that he had never looked through it. In the raw, gaping wound of those first years after her disappearance, the thought of seeing her smiling face, frozen in time alongside classmates who had gone on to live their lives, had been unbearable. Now it felt different. He sat on the edge of her bed, the yearbook's weight in his hands, feeling significant, a piece of his daughter's life he had left unexplored. He flipped through the glossy pages, the scent of old paper rising to meet him. He found her senior portrait. Her smile, so bright and full of unwritten promise, sent a familiar, sharp pang through his heart. 22 years, he whispered, his calloused finger tracing the outline of her face. I need to learn to keep you in my heart without this pain, sweetheart. His eyes drifted to the photo beside Alicia's, her best friend, Amy Davidson. The two of them, inseparable. Amy's face brought a cascade of memories, sleepovers filled with laughter, whispered secrets over dinner at their table. Frank realized he hadn't heard anything about Amy in years. After Alicia vanished, Amy had been a constant, grief-stricken presence, but as the months bled into years, the visits had tapered off, as they so often do. Curious, Frank flipped to the section with individual student profiles. He found Alicia's page, her words a poignant echo from a world of hope. Thanks to Mom and Dad for always believing in me. To my teachers who pushed me to do better, and to my best friend Amy. Don't forget to return my book, The Secret Garden, illustrated classic edition. You old grandma. Love you forever. Frank managed a weak, watery chuckle. The light-hearted jab at Amy was so typical of their friendship. His mind snagged on the book. The Secret Garden had been Alicia's absolute favorite since childhood. She collected different editions. Had Amy ever returned it? He couldn't recall seeing that specific copy among Alicia's things. He began searching the boxes of books he'd already packed. The dust billowed, making his eyes water. He carried the boxes to the living room to sort them properly. He laid them out on the coffee table, fantasy novels, science texts, nature magazines, but no illustrated edition of The Secret Garden. On a whim, he checked the back of the yearbook. Amy had scribbled her phone number with a note. "Call me any time, BFF." He dialed it, not expecting it to work. An automated voice confirmed it was no longer in service. Just then, the front door opened. Elaine walked in, her arms laden with groceries. She stopped short, her face tightening as she took in the chaotic archaeology of Alicia's life spread across their living room. "Frank, what is all this?" Her voice was sharp, with a pain he knew all too well. "I was just going through her things like we planned," he explained, standing. "We agreed to sort and store them, Frank, not spread them all out like this. I thought we were finally moving forward, not dwelling." "I'm not dwelling," he said, his voice gentle. He showed her the yearbook, pointing to Alicia's note. "She mentioned a book Amy borrowed. I was just curious if it was here." Elaine sighed, a sound heavy with years of exhaustion. "A book? Frank, it doesn't matter anymore. Do you know where Amy is now?" "I see her in town sometimes," Elaine replied, her tone softening slightly as she began unpacking the groceries. "She lives in a camper these days, over by the woods." "I thought maybe I'd visit her," Frank said tentatively. "Not just for the book. It's been so long." Elaine stopped and turned to face him. "I can't do that today, Frank. Last night we agreed to clean up and let go of the hope. Going to see Amy. It feels like the opposite of that." She gestured to the mess. "I'll stay and clean this up. If you want to go, that's your choice." He nodded, understanding. He felt a pang of guilt, but something was pulling him, a thread of curiosity he couldn't ignore. He grabbed the yearbook and his keys. As the door closed behind him, he stepped out into the misty Mornington morning, the book clutched tightly in his hand. Following Elaine's directions, Frank found the camper park, a modest strip of land overlooking a thicket of woods. He located Amy's camper, a well-maintained blue and white unit, and knocked. The woman who answered was in her early 40s, her blonde hair streaked with grey. She looked at him with polite confusion. "Amy," he said, his voice catching. "It's Frank Sanders, Alicia's father." Her eyes widened in a cascade of emotions, shock, sadness, then a hesitant warmth. "Mr. Sanders, oh my goodness, please come in." The camper was cozy and neat. As Amy prepared coffee, her movements deliberate, Frank felt the weight of 22 years settling between them. "What brings you here after all this time?" she asked, her voice soft. Frank showed her the yearbook, pointing out Alicia's note. Amy's face softened into a sad smile. "No, I never returned it." She retrieved a worn copy of The Secret Garden from a cabinet. "After she disappeared, I couldn't part with it. It's the last thing I have from her." She handed the book to Frank. "Would you mind terribly if I kept it?" "Of course," Frank said, his throat tight. He opened the book, the pages yellowed with age. A folded page from a youth fashion magazine served as a bookmark. He unfolded it. A young male model in stylish clothes caught his eye. Something about him was familiar. "Who's this?" he asked, pointing. Amy leaned in. "Oh, that's Jason Murray. He was in our class." Frank turned back to the yearbook and found Jason's photo. "I remember now. Talented to be modeling at that age." "He has his own fashion line now, from what I hear," Amy said. "You know," Frank said, a vague memory surfacing. Elaine once mentioned you were dating him back then. Amy's expression shuttered instantly. That's not true. I never dated Jason. In fact, I never even liked him. She hesitated. He was actually close with Alicia for a while. This was a shock. Alicia? She never mentioned him. It was during our junior year, Amy explained. He seemed to have a crush on her. Once we realized what kind of person he really was, we both stayed away from him. But... She paused, frowning in thought. Actually, now that I think about it, I did see them talking a few times during senior year. Alicia even asked me some odd questions about him. What kind of questions? Frank's interest was no longer casual. She asked if I thought someone like Jason just needed help to change. She even asked me to drive past his house once. Amy shook her head. I thought it was weird, but Alicia always had such a soft heart. She wanted to see the good in everyone. Did the police know about this? Yes, I told them, Amy confirmed. They questioned everyone, including Jason, but by that time Alicia was dating Brandon Knox. He was their main suspect. Frank's mind was racing. Why was Jason's picture in this book? Amy looked at the torn magazine page. That was from Alicia's favorite magazine. She hated him so much by the end that she tore out the page with his face on it and said there was nothing better for it than to be used as a bookmark. A friendship, a falling out, a torn page used in spite. It didn't add up. Do you know where Jason is now? Frank asked. Amy pulled out her phone. The high school alumni group just had a reunion last weekend at his house. I didn't go, but they shared his address. She forwarded the information to Frank. As he stood to leave, a new, unsettling question began to form in his mind. Frank sat in his car, his promise to Elaine warring with the disquieting information from Amy. Just a quick drive-by, he told himself, just to see. 20 minutes later, he was parked across the street from a sprawling modern house in one of Mornington's most affluent neighborhoods. The gate was open. A man emerged from the front door, an older, successful version of the boy in the yearbook, Jason Murray. As Jason said goodbye to a female guest, his gaze swept across the street and landed directly on Frank's car. Frank, realizing he was clearly visible, got out and approached the gate. Jason Murray, isn't it? Frank called out. Who are you and why are you watching my house? Jason's tone was instantly hostile. My name is Frank Sanders. I'm Alicia Sanders' father. Jason's face hardened. What do you want? I heard there was a reunion here. I was told you might have been close to her at one point. Who told you that? Amy. Jason's voice was sharp. I was never her boyfriend. I barely knew her. I told the police that back then. I never said you were her boyfriend, Frank said calmly, though his heart was beginning to pound. If we ever talked, it was probably because I borrowed money or needed help with homework, Jason said dismissively. I have a reputation to maintain now. I don't want reporters spreading rumors. His body language was tense, his eyes darting around. You should leave, Jason called over his shoulder as he strode back to his house. I have nothing else to say about Alicia Sanders. Frank stood there, stunned. The reaction was wildly disproportionate. It wasn't annoyance, it was fear. He drove away, shame and confusion swirling within him. He had broken his promise to Elaine, and for what? To be rebuffed by an arrogant man. He should go home, he should let it go, but he couldn't. He found himself turning not towards home, but towards the town centre. As he passed the local hardware store, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Jason Murray was at the cashier purchasing a shovel and a small wooden box. A cold dread washed over Frank. He watched as Jason then went next door to the floral shop and emerged with a bouquet of white hyacinths, Alicia's favorite flowers. It couldn't be a coincidence. Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. He started his car and followed at a distance as Jason drove towards Whitlow Cliff, a dramatic wooded coastline dotted with a few vacation properties. Jason turned onto a private drive leading to a small, weathered cottage. Frank parked further up the road, concealed by trees. He watched as Jason unloaded his purchases into a garden trolley and began walking down a narrow path toward the cliff's edge. Frank slipped out of his car, moving through the brush, his earlier shame replaced by a primal, urgent need to know. He followed, staying hidden. The path opened to a secluded overlook. There, near the cliff's edge, Jason began to dig. After excavating a hole, Jason knelt and opened the wooden box. His lips moved silently as he sorted through what looked like papers. A sudden gust of wind swept across the cliff, scattering some of the papers. Jason cursed, quickly closing the box and scrambling to retrieve them. He then placed the box in the hole, laid the bouquet of white hyacinths on top, and began filling it in. When he was finished, he stood over the spot for a long moment. Then his voice carried on the wind, a chilling whisper that pierced Frank's soul. "I think you can hold these memories now, Alicia." Frank jerked back in shock, his foot slipping on loose pebbles. Jason's head snapped up. "Hello? Is someone there?" Frank froze, pressing himself against a tree trunk. Jason picked up the shovel and took a few steps toward his hiding place, his eyes scanning the brush. After an eternity, he stepped back, muttering about the wind, and headed back to the cottage. Frank waited until Jason's car had disappeared down the drive. His legs felt weak, but he retrieved the shovel Jason had left leaning against the cottage and returned to the burial site. He began to dig, his movements frantic. He uncovered the flowers, their sweet scent, a cruel counterpoint to the grim task. His shovel struck the wooden box. "I knew someone was out there." Frank spun around. Jason stood a few yards away, his face a mask of rage. "You shouldn't have come back," Jason said, advancing slowly. "I heard you," Frank said, his voice raw. "What have you buried here?" "Stop!" Jason shouted, pulling a gun. "Drop the shovel!" As Frank raised his hands, he surreptitiously pulled his phone from his pocket with his free hand. "I'm calling the police," he bluffed. "Go ahead, shoot me. I'm one button away from alerting them." Jason lunged, knocking the phone from Frank's hand. It skittered towards the cliff edge. In that split second, Frank kicked the gun from Jason's hand, sending it tumbling into the abyss. He dove for the phone, his fingers closing around it just as it was about to fall. He pressed the SOS button, sending his location to emergency services. "The police are coming, Jason," Frank pleaded. "Just tell me the truth." "You don't understand," Jason screamed, his composure shattered. "I have a life, a reputation." He lunged again, seizing Frank by the throat. Frank gasped for air, spots dancing in his vision. Just as his world began to go dark, the wail of sirens cut through the air. Jason's grip loosened. Within moments, officers swarmed the clearing. Frank slumped to the ground, coughing as Jason was handcuffed. "He buried a box," Frank rasped, pointing. "He said my daughter's name." A forensic team carefully excavated the site. Inside the box was a time capsule of a secret, toxic relationship. Printouts of manipulative text messages, explicit photos of Alicia taken in the nearby cottage, and rambling, possessive notes scrawled on the back. One photo, showing Alicia's terrified face, had a note ending with an apology for having to kill her because she refused to be with him. The full, horrifying story was there. Their secret relationship, her attempts to break free, his obsessive rage. A short distance away, another team found what they were all dreading: bone fragments. After 22 years, Alicia had been found. A week later, a small flotilla gathered off the coast of Mornington. Frank and Elaine, holding each other, scattered their daughter's ashes into the Pacific. White hyacinths tossed from every boat floated on the waves. Amy released the worn copy of The Secret Garden, a final, tearful goodbye. Jason, in his confession, had detailed the final days. He'd held Alicia captive in the cottage, trying to force her to stay with him. When she fought back, He'd killed her in a rage at the cliff's edge and buried her. For 22 years he had kept the box of memories as a secret shrine to his obsession. The reunion at his house must have stirred something in him, prompting the bizarre ritual Frank had witnessed. That evening, Frank and Elaine sat on their back porch. A new photo of Alicia sat between them, a candid shot of her laughing on the beach, hair wild in the wind. The pain was still there, a permanent part of their landscape, but the crushing weight of the unknown had lifted. She believed in the power of love to transform people, Frank said, his voice thick. It's not a bad thing to believe in, Elaine replied softly. Her mistake wasn't in believing people could change, it was in thinking she alone could make it happen. As darkness fell, Frank looked out at the sky. A simple note in a yearbook had unraveled a 2-decade-old mystery. The journey had been a descent into hell, but it had led them here, to a place of brutal truth, and finally, to a quiet, heartbreaking peace. Alicia was no longer lost. She was part of the sea she loved, free at last.